All right, so are you ready to dive into some pretty intense political drama?
Oh, always.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Um, well, we're going to be looking at the recent budget showdown in Congress. And this news article that we have, it just lays out the whole story in a way that I think is going to keep you on the edge of your seat.
Definitely a nail biter.
Yeah. So the big question here is, did former President Trump actually try to push the government into a shutdown?
Hmm.
And if he did, what does that tell us about his power and influence right now, even though he's not in office?
Right. Right.
Okay, so to set the scene, Congress needed to pass a budget,
Right.
to avoid a government shutdown.
Yeah. Pretty standard procedure.
Right, exactly. But here's the thing that I found so interesting. It wasn't even a politician who first, raised a red flag about this proposed budget deal.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah,
Who was it?
it was Elon Musk.
What?
I know.
Wow.
Right.
That's pretty significant, actually.
I think so too.
Yeah, it really kind of highlights the influence that non-politicians now have
Right.
in shaping public opinion and even legislative action.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Someone who's not even elected
Right.
can have this much impact on what's happening in Washington.
It's wild, right?
It's wild.
So we've got Elon Musk kind of setting the stage here, and then enter stage right, Donald Trump, right?
Right.
He comes in with these really dramatic demands for the Republicans.
Okay. Like what?
He wanted them to completely scrap the bipartisan deal that they had worked out with the Democrats.
Okay.
And he wanted to tie a debt ceiling increase to the budget, which is a whole other can of worms. We'll get into that in a bit.
Right.
But he even threatened primary challenges to those who didn't follow his lead.
Oh, wow. He was playing hardball.
Yeah, he was really trying to assert his dominance.
Right, even though he's not in office anymore.
Exactly.
So it begs the question, how much power does a former president really have?
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen former presidents try to stay relevant, but this is something else.
It really isn't. It's interesting because he's really utilizing social media to do this.
Oh, absolutely. That's his main platform now.
Right. And it's really effective, because
Yeah.
he can bypass the traditional media.
Right, he goes directly to his base.
Exactly.
So, this whole debt ceiling thing, why was he so insistent on tying that to the budget? What's the big deal with the debt ceiling anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's something that a lot of people might not fully understand.
Yeah, it's a bit wonky.
Yeah.
But basically, the debt ceiling is the limit on how much money the U.S. government can borrow.
Right.
And when we hit that limit, Congress had to vote to raise it.
Okay.
Otherwise, the government could default on its debts, which would be a total economic disaster.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And it's always politically contentious because, no one wants to be seen as approving more borrowing.
Yeah.
But the reality is we've already spent the money.
Yeah.
So raising the debt ceiling is really just paying our bills.
Okay, that makes sense.
But Trump is trying to use this as leverage.
Right, to get the Republicans to agree to his demand.
Exactly. He was trying to force their hand.
Okay, so then what happened? Did the Republicans all cave to Trump's pressure?
Well, not exactly. The article says that 38 House Republicans actually voted against Trump's wishes.
38, really?
Yeah, they defied him.
Wow, so even with the threat of primary challenges, they still went against him.
Yeah, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it signals a potential shift in the power dynamics within the Republican Party.
Right, it's like maybe his grip on the party isn't as strong as it used to be.
Maybe not. It's certainly something to watch.
Okay, so to clarify, the budget did pass, right?
Yes, it did. It passed without the debt ceiling increase.
Okay.
So we avoided a shutdown for now.
For now, yeah.
But it's like a temporary fix.
Right, they're going to have to deal with the debt ceiling eventually.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
That problem's not going away.
No,
And how they handle that will be very telling.
I agree. So it sounds like the reactions to the outcome were kind of all over the place.
Oh, yeah, very divided.
Right, like some of Trump's allies were spinning this as a win because the final budget was smaller than what was initially proposed.
Right.
But then the Democrats were saying, well, he didn't actually get what he wanted.
Yeah, it's all about how you frame it.
Yeah,
Political spin is a powerful tool.
it really is.
Yeah.
And, one thing that I found interesting was that after all this fiery rhetoric on social media, Trump went completely silent after the vote.
Interesting.
Right.
Almost like he wanted to distance himself from the outcome.
Yeah, it's almost like he didn't want to be associated with it if it wasn't a clear victory.
Could be.
Yeah.
That silence could be strategic.
Yeah.
It allows him to let his allies claim victory while he maintains a certain level of deniability.
Right. Like, well, I wasn't directly involved.
Exactly.
Okay, so this whole budget battle, I mean, it really does feel like just a snapshot of the larger political
Oh,
landscape.
absolutely.
Right, there's all these clashes of ideology, these power struggles.
And let's not forget the drama.
Oh yeah, tons of drama. But what I'm curious about is, what does this actually mean for the average person? Like, how does this impact our lives?
That's the key question, right?
Yeah.
Because this isn't just political theater.
Right.
These decisions have real consequences.
Right. This is our money we're talking about.
Exactly.
This is how our government is functioning.
Exactly. The budget determines how our resources are allocated,
Right.
which programs get funding, how much the government borrows.
Right.
All of that affects us directly.
Right. It's not just some abstract thing happening in Washington.
Not at all.
It's very real. Okay, so it's clear that this is just the tip of the iceberg,
Oh, yeah,
right? This is just the beginning.
definitely.
Trump is known for pushing his agenda relentlessly.
He doesn't give up easily.
No, he does not. And this budget fight could be a sign of what's to come as we head into the next election.
I think you're right. We could be in for a wild ride.
Yeah, I think so too. But before we get into all of that, let's dig a little deeper into the implications of this budget battle for Trump's future and for the Republican Party.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, because this is really where things start to get interesting.
It is.
I'm fascinated to see how this all plays out.
Me too.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Let's do it. So the article does mention, some potential conflicts down the line, especially between Trump's priorities and, some Republicans who are worried about the national debt.
Yeah, you're right, it does.
Yeah.
And it specifically mentions campaign promises like tax cuts and tariffs, which could clash with those Republicans who are all about, keeping that national debt in check.
Right. It's that classic tug of war
Yeah.
between, stimulating the economy and keeping spending under control.
Right.
And with Trump back in the mix, that tension's just going to increase, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially considering what happened during his last term.
Right, didn't he already, implement some pretty big tax cuts?
He did, yeah.
Which some people say contributed to the debt, and now he's talking about wanting to cut taxes even more.
Yeah, and if he pushes for deeper cuts, that could really set up a major conflict with the fiscal conservatives in his own party.
Right, the ones who are really concerned about the budget.
Exactly, yeah.
And then there's the tariffs.
Oh, yeah, he loves those.
He does, but don't those also have economic consequences?
It's tricky. I mean, tariffs can be used to protect domestic industries,
Right.
but they can also lead to higher prices for businesses and consumers.
Which could lead to inflation.
Right, exactly.
So it's a bit of a gamble.
It is, and we'll have to see how he navigates that if he decides to run again.
So potential conflicts over tax cuts, tariffs, the national debt. And we can't forget about the debt ceiling.
Oh, yeah, that's still out there.
Right. That's
Yeah.
looming over everything.
Indeed time.
Congress is going to have to deal with that again at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
They can't just keep ignoring it.
No, kicking the can down the road only works for so long.
Right.
Sooner or later, they're going to have to address it, and it's going to be another battle.
Especially if Trump's involved.
Yeah, he's not afraid to use that as leverage.
No, he's not.
Remember how he was willing to use it in this recent budget fight?
Yeah, he even threatened a government shutdown if he didn't get his way.
Right. Imagine if he tries that again during an election year.
Oh, the chaos.
It would be insane.
Right, like a government shutdown, that disrupts essential services.
Impacts the economy.
Yeah.
Erodes public trust in the government.
No one wants that. Nobody. Okay, so this whole situation is starting to feel a bit like, I don't know, a political thriller.
Oh, no, right? It's got all the elements.
Right, like powerful figures, high-stakes negotiations.
And the future of the country hanging in the balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's dramatic.
It's really fascinating to me how this budget showdown has, really exposed those cracks within the Republican Party.
It's like a microcosm of the larger ideological battle that's happening.
Right, you've got the Trump loyalists, the fiscal conservatives, the moderates.
And everyone in between.
Yeah, and with Trump potentially throwing his hat in the ring again.
Those divisions are only going to become more apparent.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
It is. It's going to be fascinating.
So it's clear that this budget fight wasn't just about numbers.
No, it wasn't.
Right, this was about power, influence, and the direction of the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
And with Trump as a potential candidate again, the political landscape is about to get a lot more interesting, to say the least.
It is. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, but before we get too caught up in speculation, let's take a closer look at some of the key players involved in this whole budget drama.
Okay, sounds good.
Because understanding their motivations can really help us understand the bigger picture, right?
Definitely. It's all about the context.
Yeah, so let's start with Elon Musk.
Okay.
I mean, it's wild how someone who's not even a politician can have such a big impact on this stuff.
It is, yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts on his involvement in this budget fight?
I think it highlights the growing influence of these tech billionaires
Yeah,
in shaping public policy.
right.
I mean, they have the wealth, they have the social media presence.
Right, they can reach millions of people.
Exactly, and potentially sway public opinion.
Right, and in this case, his criticism of the budget deal really seemed to resonate with a lot of conservatives.
Yeah, the ones who are wary of government spending.
Right, and it probably encouraged some of those Republicans to oppose the deal.
It probably did.
Yeah, it's like he gave them permission to kind of challenge the establishment.
Right, even if it meant going against Trump.
Exactly, which
Well,
is interesting in itself.
yeah, very interesting.
And speaking of defying Trump, the article mentions Congressman Chip Roy as someone who stood up to Trump's demands.
Yeah, he was one of the few.
What can you tell us about him and why he did that?
Well, Chip Roy is a fiscal conservative through and through.
Okay.
He's been very vocal about his concerns about government spending.
Even within his own party.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't hold back.
Okay, so he's not afraid to make waves.
No, not at all. And his willingness to defy Trump on this budget vote shows how strongly he feels about this issue.
Yeah, he's clearly not afraid to stand up for what he believes in.
No, even if it means going against the party leader.
That's a bold move, especially with Trump's, track record of going after people who disagree with him.
Yeah, I can hold a grudge.
Yeah, so it's pretty significant that Roy and these other Republicans voted against him.
It is.
It suggests that there might be a growing willingness within the party to, question his authority.
Yeah, a little bit of pushback.
Yeah, and maybe that's a sign of things to come.
Could be. It's definitely something to watch.
It's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, the dynamics are shifting.
So we've got these divisions within the Republican Party.
And with the next election coming up.
Right. Those divisions are only going to become more pronounced.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating and potentially chaotic ride.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up.
Buckle up, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the political side of things.
The drama, the power struggles.
Yeah, all of that. But let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the potential long-term consequences of this budget fight.
the bigger picture.
Yeah, and what it tells us about the state of American democracy as a whole.
Okay, yeah, that's a really important question. That's a big one.
Right, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been looking at all this, the power dynamics, the clashes within the Republican Party, these really interesting people.
Yeah.
But zooming out, what does it all say about American democracy?
Well, I think this budget fight really highlights how fragile our system is.
Yeah.
And just how divided we are as a country.
It's like we're seeing these huge divisions in Congress, right?
Right.
A former president actively working against the current administration,
Yeah.
and a public that just seems to be losing trust in the government.
It's a recipe for dysfunction.
It really is.
Yeah, and when you have these crucial issues, like the budget and the national debt, becoming these political battlegrounds,
Yeah.
it just erodes public confidence even more.
Right, because it makes it seem like the government can't function,
Exactly, yeah.
and people get disillusioned.
And it becomes this vicious
Oh,
cycle.
right, like the more dysfunctional it gets.
The less faith people have.
Right, and then the less likely they are to actually engage in the process.
Right, which makes solving these problems even harder.
It's a mess.
It is. And this whole thing also shows how tough it is to govern in this age of social media,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
where these partisan narratives are just amplified constantly.
Right, and it's so hard to have reasonable conversations about complex issues.
It is. It's like we're all stuck in these echo chambers,
Yeah.
just hearing things that reinforce what we already believe.
So how do we break out of that? How do we find common ground?
It's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, without compromise, we end up with gridlock, right?
And inaction.
And that can have huge consequences.
This budget battle is a perfect example.
Exactly.
We avoided a shutdown, but just barely.
And the underlying problems are still there.
Right, those haven't been addressed.
No, not at all.
So what's the way forward?
I don't know. It's a really complex problem.
Yeah.
It requires effort from everyone, our leaders, the public.
We need leaders who actually prioritize the common good.
Yes, not just their own party.
And who are willing to actually have real conversations and compromise.
Right, exactly.
And we, as citizens, we need to stay informed.
Yes, engage.
and hold our elected officials accountable.
Absolutely.
We can't just complain about the state of democracy, right?
Right. We have to
We
participate.
have to be active.
Yeah, democracy is not a spectator sport.
It's not. It's something we have to work at.
It is, and it requires us to be willing to engage with people we disagree with,
Even when it's hard.
especially when it's hard.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
It is. We have to find ways to bridge these divides.
To have those tough conversations respectfully. I think that's a great place to wrap up, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the takeaway here for our listeners
Yeah.
is that this budget battle wasn't just about politics. It was about the future of our democracy.
Clearly was.
And we need to find a way to overcome these divisions
To rebuild trust.
and to work together, which is hard, but
It's essential.
it is. So thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it's given you some things to think about
Absolutely.
and maybe even inspired you to get a little bit more involved in shaping our democracy.
Get out there. Make your voice heard.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
And remember, democracy is a verb.
That's a good one.
As I